a series called Awestruck, and we're just awestruck by a crazy God that loves you, that has created you unbelievably. So we're exploring that today, and we look inside the human body, and it's going to be a intriguing morning for me. I trust that God will speak to you. Our whole hope in this series is that we just get a glimpse of God, because when we just get a glimpse of this incredible God, we're blown away. We are blown away. So that's the hope of this Awestruck series. If you missed our first one, too bad, you missed it. And where were we all last week? You guys sang so loud today that we didn't need to have church last week. And so anyway, we are thrilled that you're here. Go ahead and be seated. I don't know why I had you standing. But thanks for joining us. A couple things we want you to pay attention to your bulletins. There's lots of announcements and opportunities in the pages of that bulletin. But also there's a prayer shawl in the back for Ray Adams. He has bladder cancer, and so if you would, make sure you sign that card. Also, we have a praise card for the family of Xander Riddle, 3-month-old, that Donna took a prayer shawl to them and to the family last week or a week ago, and they were just blown away that someone would care and pray for them. So today we have a praise card because we didn't get to send a card with Donna before, and so if you want to know more about Xander, but he's recovering and doing pretty well, but just a neat opportunity for our family to lift up a family that's going through a tough time. The neat thing is we know that God knows little Xander, He knows Ray, and we lift up both of them to our great God. We will take up an offering at this time, and we'll have a prayer. Thank you for your continued goodness. And you know what? Our God is so almighty that it challenges me to be generous like He is with me. And so I challenge you to be generous with your almighty God too. Let's pray. God, we pause to reflect on who you are today. And we're just sort of blown away by your creativity. We're blown away by your intellect and your precision and the way you put us together. So we just pause in awe that you would care for us. Thank you for entrusting this world to us and entrusting us with some of the glories and some of the material things. And so we present them back to you, trusting that these will all help us share how awesome you are. We pray in Jesus' name.
Holy majesty. Dear Lord, as we come to this time to put extra thought into the gifts that you've given us, the gifts that we can never repay. We have gifts every day. We're all thrilled at this beautiful spring day, but we can never repay the life that you gave us. So we'd like to think about that and be so, so thankful that you thought we were all, each and every one of us, worthy of this gift of your life. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
into God's presence. Good stuff. We're in this series called Awestruck, just trying to put the focus on a great God that we gather each week, and thank you for your help in lifting up His name today. We're going to have some special guests with us here after a few minutes. Looking forward to that. I think you'll really enjoy their insight. And so appreciate Joel and Robin helping out today. As you can see, got the big sun here today. And it's hot up here. Ooh. This was actually supposed to go with last week's message, and we couldn't just bump everything a week because we had a special day planned today, so you'll have to come back in 2 weeks to find out more about God's incredible universe and the sun, and so that's what that's all about. Unfortunately, we had a funeral. Russ did a funeral on Tuesday, and they had to live with the sun in here for their funeral. It's okay. St. Augustine said, "Men go abroad to wonder at the heights of mountains, at the huge waves of the sea, at the long courses of the rivers, at the vast compass of the ocean, at the circular motion of the stars, and they pass by themselves without wondering." Today we look at how God has made us. We're going to look at a little bit at a word that's kind of fun to say. It's a Hebrew word called yada. I am not a Hebrew scholar. Most of you know me well enough by now, so I rely on others. But this is a word that means to know. That's how the Bible says it means to know. It's an intimate word. Intimacy is how we kind of say it. Usually when we think of intimacy, we think of it as a sexual intimacy. That's how we associate the word. But this is way different. Not way different, but it encompasses to be known and to know fully is what intimacy is. And it's first introduced to us in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, where Adam knew Yada, Eve. When we were younger, we thought, well, that's good that they knew each other. But as we grew older, we go, oh, they knew each other. And so it was meant, it's a sexual term in that way, but it means to be known fully and to be fully known. And that's what God wants from us. And so that word yada in some form is used over 1,000 times. And it has different meanings. It has a covenantal meaning, but it implies getting to know someone. Intimacy. Again, we sort of drop the ball, but we always think of the sexual part of intimacy. But intimacy is just way more than that. Think through... Last summer we went to Nebraska to celebrate an accomplishment with my dad, and we got to the house and enjoyed time. But then a man a little older than me stopped by, and he had his baby granddaughter. I can't even tell you how old she was. Pretty tiny. And his name was Steve, and Steve said, "Hey, can you watch my granddaughter?" Which I thought, "Mom and Dad know that you dropped the granddaughter off?" But he's really good friends with my dad, but he was going to go set up tables and chairs. It was going to take him half hour or so. I said, "I'll be back, don't worry." Well, we had capable people there. Little granddaughter started to cry at the moment Grandpa left. I mean, we're talking, I don't know how old, just several weeks, but not old. Anyway, she cried. And so we thought, we're capable, we all tried to like, I'll take a turn with her, and I can remember grabbing her. I thought, sure as Brian can calm this little girl. No. She cried for 20 to 25 minutes, and we never did get her calmed down. I took her outside, we were looking at the flowers, and we were walking around the yard, and they were inside looking at pictures, and nobody had the magic touch. We tried rubbing her back, we tried gently caressing and doing all these things that normally would put babies to sleep or help them, and no avail. I mean, just constant. We all were just looking at each other like, wow. And then Grandpa Steve came back, and he said, "Hey, I'm home." Instantly, that baby stopped crying. That fast. I mean, it was that fast. And he took her, and she just fell asleep right on Grandpa's chest. It was incredible. That's intimacy, to be known and to be fully known and have a safe, secure spot there. intimacy. You moms know it. You could tell when your kids were little if they were needed diapers changed by the way they were crying, or if they were hungry, and the husband would be like, "What? How do you know? How do you know? To know, yada, to know." Very intimate term. We see it in Job. We're going to talk more about Job in the next couple weeks, but so thankful for this book of Job. I think it's been passed down for a reason. But Job, he starts out from chapters 1 and 2, and he loses his family. First of all, he loses everything he owns, and he owned a lot. I mean, you read through Job chapter 1, and 7,000 sheep and all. I mean, he was the greatest in the East, is what the Bible described him as. And so, some other army came in, and oh, hey, you know how to calm that baby down pretty good, right? Army came in and stole everything that Job had owned. His messenger came and says, "I got bad news." So he's like lamenting that. And then, not very long after that, another messenger comes in and says, "I got bad news. You just lost all your kids. They were at your oldest son's enjoying a party, and the windstorm came through. Probably a tornado, as we know it. House fell in, and they're all dead." So here's Job, this upright, righteous man, dealing with it. And so all the way through Job, he's going through this, and he gets to chapter 37, 38, and he has people saying, "Hey, give up on God, you should curse him and die." And then he has this conversation, and there's so much more than what we'll go today, but we remember from 2 weeks ago, "Hear this, O Job, stop and consider the wondrous works of God." Then in chapter 38, the Lord answered Job out of the world and says, "Who is it that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Did you know? Do you know, Job? Yada, do you know? When the morning stars sang together, all the sons of God shouted for joy, did you know? Who shut the sea? Who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it." He put limits on the ocean. "Have you commanded the morning since your days began?" I can't remember doing that since my days began. "Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked the recesses of the deep?" No, I do a little swimming, but I've never entered the deep. "Have you entered the storehouses of snow? Have you seen the storehouses of hail?" Job's like, "No, I don't know. God, I don't know. You know, God." This one reminded me of Wisconsin. "From whose womb did the ice come forth, and who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen." He says, "Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind?" We're going to talk about this next week. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? But he says, "God, I don't know. You know." I don't know why we confuse ourselves with thinking we know the things of God. I think Job God never really did answer him. But I think he did answer him. He said, "Job, you know that I know." And sometimes isn't that what we just need to know? We just need to know that our God knows. I think that's what Job wanted. Just to even know. Are you aware, God? Do you know what I'm going through? I just lost everything. Do you know? And then our deep cry sometimes, "Do you know, God, what I'm going through?" God knows. He used the animal kingdom, he used the universe to say, "This is who I am. This is who I am." He says, "Job, you don't know." And he tells us, we don't know. But he knows. And it's in Psalm 139 that David uses the human body then as evidence to support that God does know us. And he uses that word 6 times in Psalm 139. "O Lord, you have stretched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all together. You hem me in, behind and before. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for the darkness is light with you. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, I am still with you. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You knit me together. Fearful, that word for fearfully isn't a word of afraid, it means awesome. That's what the scholar said, it just means awesome. Awestruck, I have been made incredibly. God, that's your work. That's the work of your hand. You were knit together. All of me was knit together, and it's interwoven, and it reacts together, and you made me wonderfully. All our bodies are incredible, and yet I think we just go by whole hum. Got a short video, and then I'm going to invite Robin Olson and Joel DeCray up, and they're going to give some insight I think you're going to find fascinating. And so, if you would, just fix your eyes on the screen, and then I'll introduce Robin and Joel.
Your body is made up of many atoms, around 7 octillion to be exact. These make up the 37 trillion cells in your body, which are actually much younger than you think. The cells that line your stomach regenerate every 5 days, which makes sense as stomach acid can dissolve metal. Your skin's outer layer, known as the epidermis, is shed every 2 to 4 weeks, meaning after 1 year you'll shed roughly 0.7 kilograms of dead skin, and only some cells have been with you your entire life. Those of the inner lens of the eye, and muscle cells of the heart, and the neurons of the cerebral cortex in your brain, which is largely responsible for your memory. And while the brain may seem small, all those wrinkles are for a good reason. Spread it all out, and the brain would be about the size of a pillowcase, which is great for the trillion nerves powering your memory. In fact, studies have shown that after viewing 2,500 images for only 3 seconds, participants could recall if they had seen one of the images with 92% accuracy. Don't believe your eyes? Maybe it's because you spend 10% of the day blinking, but they can actually distinguish between 2.3 to 7.5 million colors. Your nose is able to discriminate between 1 trillion different smells. Meanwhile, your fingers can feel a ridge as small as 13 nanometers in size. That's 7,500 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. And while you may not think much of your pinky finger, without it, you'd lose 50% of your hand's strength. Sure, the index and middle finger are essential to help pinch and grab with the thumb, but it's your ring and pinky finger that give your hand power. Now clasp one hand into the other. That's roughly the size of your heart. It beats 100,000 times per day, pumping 5.5 liters with each pulse, which is close to 3 million liters of blood every year. If you live to 75, it would fill 90 Olympic-sized swimming pools. When it's all said and done, human decomposition begins around 4 minutes after death. This process is known as self-digestion, in which your enzymes and bacteria eat you away. In fact, 3 to 5 pounds of your body is made up of bacteria. In an unclean mouth alone, 100 million to 1 billion bacteria can grow in each tooth. With 32 teeth each, some of us have more bacteria in our mouth than there are people in the world. If you've got in the knees, don't worry, your bones are incredibly strong. When testing compression strength for a rate of 1 second, an 83-kilogram person with US shoe size 11 could have 16,000 people stand on their bone at once. That is, of course, if there was enough room. And from the bones of our ancestors, we can extract DNA to learn about them. But if we were to take all of your DNA from your entire body and uncoil it, it would stretch about 10 billion miles, which is from here to Pluto and back. And if you took all of your veins, capillaries, and arteries and laid them end to end, you die. So, got a burning question you want answered? Ask it in the comments, or
fearfully and wonderfully made. It's just incredible. Just incredible. Your heart beats 100,000 times a day. And mine is more when I'm with Bart. Our eyes are incredible, the way they interpret light and make it happen, and the way we blink. The ear, right? Most of you know I'm a little hard of hearing. Like the bones inside our ear, it just fascinates me. The way God has woven you together. You're a miracle. I'm going to invite Rob Olson and Joel DeCray to come up and appreciate their insight. They are a blessing to our church family, fairly new, I would say, to our church family. And with 2 services, sometimes you don't see everybody. But Robin and her husband Ace come from Minnesota. She is a nurse, anesthetist. Close. I messed up her service. She's here for a week serving in Ladysmith, but they live in Winona, and so they live in an apartment here, and they are just a wonderful couple. We've enjoyed eating with them and spending a little time with them, and she brings some expertise that she's going to share. And this is Joel DeCray. Joel's a new doctor in town. He and his wife Sarah have roots here a little bit, and he can explain that to you, but it's exciting to have them settle with our church family and in our community, and we're just blessed because of what they bring. And so, Joel, we'll kind of start with you. Why don't you tell us a little more about yourself, and I may ask some questions, or I might not, but we'll just begin with you.
Sure. So, good morning. My wife and I, we moved here fairly recently, actually. She's been living up here for a while. I was finishing up my other job in the La Crosse area. Her family's been living in Ladysmith for the last 6 years, and we just love it up here. So we're very happy to be here. I've been a family doctor for about 8 years now. And I know when I go home to visit my folks in La Crosse, if one of our kids has a sniffle, my mom will still say, Joel, they're kind of sick. Maybe you should take them to the doctor. So, a couple other things too. I'm sure you're familiar with medical people. We oftentimes use absolutely ridiculous words for very simple things. So if Brian comes into the office and I say, boy, Brian, you've got a terrible case of syncopus. I'm really sorry. All that means is he has the hiccups. So we say those things, I think, to justify the amount of student loans we've taken.
I'm going to interrupt you. What's it called when you block Shelby's shot at basketball?
It's called greatness.
We have some guys that do basketball. And it's happened on more than one occasion. So anyway.
And then the last thing I'll just mention too, before we kind of go into the human body a little bit, is I'm going to be unemployed in heaven, and I'm very happy about that. So that's all right with me. So if it's all right, I think we'll kind of take a 10,000-foot view, kind of start with God, and kind of move through creation, and kind of talk about the human body a little bit. So if we start with our first principles, I'll start with a quote from Ravi Zacharias, who you may have heard as one of my favorite speakers and authors. If God ever says that he loves, who is he loving before creation? If God ever says that he speaks, who is he speaking to before creation? The answer is, only in the Trinity is there unity and diversity in the community of the Trinity. And so out of that, God, he knows love, he is love, he didn't need us, but he chose to make us out of that love. Genesis 1:26, the verse we're all familiar with, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. Psalm 8:3-8, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. So we talked about creation and humans are made in God's image. There's a Latin term we're familiar with it called the imago Dei. It means literally created in the image of God. It refers to the unique imprint that God put on humanity, identifying people as a special creation. So what that means exactly has been debated for centuries throughout Christendom. Famously, Thomas Aquinas, he defined it as the imago Dei was the ability to know and to love, and specifically to know and to love God. So there's a lot more to be said about that. We'll kind of move from the non-physical part of the Imago Dei to more of the physical, our human bodies. So we'll start at the very basics. So if we start with subatomic particles, quarks, and things like that, those make up atoms. Atoms have protons, neutrons, electrons. Those make molecules. Molecules make cells. Cells make tissues. Tissues make organs. Organs make systems. And then it makes us. So,
Take note, there's going to be a test next week.
especially for the first service people, we've gone over this already. So, 90% of the atoms in our body are turned over every year, every 5 years. The atoms that made you up are no longer in your body. So the atoms that were in you when you were a kid, they could be in a different county, a different state. Who knows where they are now? Cells are amazing. Your skin cells, I think the video mentioned, it regenerates every 3 weeks. The skeleton is made new every 7 years. The skeleton doesn't just support the structure of the body. It contains the bone marrow, which make red blood cells and platelets. It contains endocrine functions as well. Your intestines shed their lining every 3 days. Red blood cells only live for 120 days, then they're destroyed and regenerated. Neurons, so your brain cells. So sometime during childhood, we don't know when, you form all the neurons you're ever going to have. And then after that, you have what you have. So, I think it's just such a complex design that if God can make all of that, I think what it tells me is that he can be trusted with the details of our lives. Maybe we'll bring up the slide there, Chris, if you've got that. So, kind of talk about the heart a little bit. We'll kind of go over the blood flow, and like Brian said, there's a test. So, blood flow starts from your upper trunk. It's the deoxygenated blood. It comes back into the heart through the superior vena cava. Blood from your lower part of your body is pumped back to the heart through the inferior vena cava. Those dump into the right atrium, which is labeled.
Take note of that.
Yep, absolutely. In the right atrium, blood's pumped through that, through the tricuspid valve, which isn't labeled, to the right ventricle. The right ventricle, blood is then pumped through the pulmonic valve, through the pulmonary artery. Blood goes through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, picks up oxygen, comes back through the pulmonary veins, and then from the pulmonary veins goes into the left atrium, then through the mitral valve, then to the left ventricle, and it's pumped out through your aorta. So if we could do the next slide here. It's kind of a neat picture of the heart in motion. I think that's one of the most beautiful things. I was showing my 5-year-old that picture this morning, Noah. I said, "No, isn't that the coolest thing you've ever seen?" And I was like, "Well, it looks kind of slimy." so that was his comment. When we listen to the heart, you know, that famous heart sound, that lub dub that we all hear, we call those S1 is the lub, S2 is the second heart sound. So what you're actually hearing is the heart valves closing. So the first lub sound is your tricuspid and mitral valve closing. The second sound is your pulmonic and aortic valve closing. And if we hear murmurs or things like that, we kind of isolate if a valve isn't functioning quite properly. When you go to the doctor, we always check your blood pressure. The reason is, you know, I'm a simple guy. Think of it, it's a pump. It's got hoses. The higher pressure you run through hoses in a pump over time, it's going to fail unless you bring the pressure down. So we want to know that, obviously. Let's kind of move on and talk about platelets. You make 5 million new platelets every second of the day. They're essential for clotting, as we all know. Briefly on the immune system, your white blood cells are kind of the gatekeeper of the body. They identify, you know, friend from foe, viruses, bacteria. They make antibodies against those. And it's so finely tuned that the food you eat is that, if, let's say you try a brand new food, it's absorbed and it goes into your bloodstream, the body knows more often than not to make any antibodies against that and you use that. Rare cases, the white blood cells will get a little confused and they'll start attacking their own cells. That's called autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's syndrome, lupus. You've probably heard of some of these. If we talk about the eye, the video mentioned it as well. 2 main cells in the eye, there's the rods and the cones. Cones are the color cells in the eye. Rods, of course, help you see at nighttime. If you notice when things are kind of dim, you don't see a lot of color. That's because the cones aren't activated, so you're just using your rod cells. It can actually take about an hour for you to fully activate your rod cells. So if you can't quite see in the dark, you got to wait a little while. I think we've all noticed that. The ear, hearing. So we think of the ear as more of a hearing organ, but it does more than that. It controls balance, it controls direction, it if I hear somebody talking to your right or left, you know which side that's coming from. Sound waves alone, they come externally, they go through your ear canal, they go to your eardrum, your tympanic membrane, which is about as thick as a piece of paper. Contacting that membrane are three of the smallest bones in the body, your malleus, your incus, and your stapes. Those transmit the signal to your cochlea, which is your hearing organ of the ear, which has thousands of hairs in it. Those hairs make that vibration, they turn it into an electrical signal, which goes via your auditory nerve to your brain, and that happens almost instantly. Taste, a quick note on taste. I always wonder, why did God make taste? He didn't have to. We could have eaten tasteless things, you know, grass, pellets, whatever it was, but I think he wants us to enjoy things. Even taste is complicated. There's three main nerves. Your facial nerve controls the forward 2/3 portion of your tongue. The glossopharyngeal nerve is the posterior 1/3 of your tongue, and the vagus nerve is kind of a backup and helps out with that a little bit. We talk about the brain. You're thinking at about 100 words per minute is the average of thoughts. The brain, when you speak, has to dial that down to however fast we choose to speak. And in that, it has to make your muscles work correctly, your gestures, everything else. What an amazing thing. There was a documentary I saw about somebody with an amazing brain. His name is Daniel Tammet. I don't know if you've heard of him. But the number pi, 3.14, it goes on and on and on. It's an irrational, non-repeating number. He memorized it to 22,514 digits from memory and could say it in 5 hours. He also knows, if you tell him your birthday, he will know the day of the week that your birthday was within seconds. He can calculate that. If God made our brains like that, think of his brain. How unfathomable is his mind? This kind of blows me away. Memory, you know, there's different types of memory. There's visual memory, looking at a diagram. Audio memory, hearing somebody talk and remembering things. Smell is probably the most potent memory. If you smell something, it can bring you back instantly to your childhood, to whatever you were doing. I'm sure we've all experienced that. My memory, I'm sort of a slow learner, so I have to spend a lot of time repeating things over and over and studying them. Like when I was in medical school, I averaged easily 100 hours a week of studying, which is kind of hard in my life to be a newborn. But usually once I learn something, I tend not to forget it, although she would tell me I have selective memory. So talking about the brain, I think the mystery is, where do the brain and the mind connect? Where do things like logic fall in? Justice, mercy, all of our thoughts. I don't think science can explain that. I think that's part of God's wonderful creation. The last thing I'll just mention is sleep. God didn't have to make us sleep, but he did. Fish don't sleep. We sleep an average of a third of our lives, which is 24 years. During sleep, we think that it helps regenerate damaged cells, it boosts our immune system. During REM sleep, which is kind of when you're initially falling asleep, your mind's active, but your body's paralyzed. So oftentimes, there'll be problem solving even as you're sleeping. We all know this. You can wake up in the middle of the night and jot down notes of things you've remembered. The expression is, let me sleep on it. It's true. That's how people solve problems sometimes. But I wonder too, if God made sleep for another reason, if he made it to just put a kind of an endpoint to our day and give us a fresh day the next day. When I was reading about this, it brought to my mind a poem I heard years ago. It's an anonymous poem. I think it was written by a teacher, I would guess. But it goes like this, and then I'll turn it over to Robin. He came to my desk with a quivering lip. The lesson was done. Have you a new sheet for me, dear teacher? I've spoiled this one. I took his sheet, all soiled and blotted, and gave him a new one, all unspotted. And into his tired heart I cried, do better now, my child. Then I went to the throne with a trembling heart. The day was done. Have you a new day for me, dear master? I've spoiled this one. He took my day, all soiled and blotted, and gave me a new one, all unspotted. And into my tired heart he cried, do better now, my child.
Incredible. I mean, just blown away by God's creativity, his complexity, and that happens, we don't even know it. Incredible. Thank you. Robin.
Okay, my turn. Do you remember a couple weeks ago when you were talking about who had the first job?
Yeah?
You remember that God put Adam in a deep sleep?
Yeah. Okay, we're done today.
All right, so I'm a nurse anesthetist, and I know no one can say it right, but my job is to do anesthesia. So if you come in for surgery, I will give you whatever it takes to keep you comfortable and safe through that procedure. I also can put blocks in place if you need to have your elbow repaired or anything else that needs to be numbed, I can do that. But one of my other roles, and it's a significant one, and the one that probably causes me the most anxiety, is that I'm the person who needs to stand by if any newborns need resuscitation. So airways are my thing, that's what I do. And Joel was sharing so many things that are fantastic about our bodies, and I thought, I think I'm just going to go a little different direction, and I'm thinking mostly about babies. But to add to the discussion, onychomycosis. That's my favorite for toenail fungus. It's a lot of letters. So anyway, when I think about newborns, I'm always delighted to be present for a birth. I can't think of anything more exciting. Perhaps the only more privileged position to be in is at a death. But when someone draws their very first breath, it's a wonderful thing. A brand new person has landed, and when they take their first breath to cry, I think in a brand new voice. It's never been heard before. And I'm always so glad to hear that first cry. I know the parent's instinct is to comfort and soothe. I'm like, let them cry. The more, the better. So there are lots of reasons that I am in awe of newborns, and in particular, the ones that aren't born yet, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. But I think I'm going to start in our lungs, because our lungs are really amazing. I mean, every organ of our body is amazing, but the lungs have such an important role to play on a lot of things. But when I want to talk about oxygenation of our blood first, your lungs are made up of a lot of tiny, tiny little, like, grapes, but they're air-filled sacs, and they're called alveoli. And oxygen diffuses across that membrane, and carbon dioxide diffuses the other way. And I think right there is a miracle of God's planning, is diffusion. That molecules should move from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration just because. We depend on that. We couldn't live if they didn't do that, because it would mean that our cells had to use energy to transport each molecule of oxygen into our blood. And we need millions of them every moment. But it happens just because God planned it that way. And one of the things that most people don't realize is that if we had to depend on oxygen just dissolving itself in our blood, we would never be able to live. We can't get enough oxygen dissolved in water to meet the needs of our tissues. And so we have a molecule called hemoglobin, which contains iron, and it lives in our red blood cells. That's why they're red, because we have iron as the basis for our oxygen carrying. Octopi have copper, so their blood is blue. But we have iron, and it's red. And the hemoglobin molecule has, just the way it is formed, a great affinity for oxygen molecules. So when it comes into contact with oxygen in our lungs, the oxygen molecules naturally are grabbed on and held to that hemoglobin, which is amazing. It's like a big bus, and it takes the the oxygen down to the level of the capillaries, which is where all of the gas exchange and nutrient exchange takes place in our bodies. Because the thing about diffusion is it's only good for about the depth of a cell, just a few microns, which means that every cell in your body has to be within 1 to 2 cells of the capillary. Can you even imagine the complexity of our circulatory system? Now, you're thinking, I hope, well, if hemoglobin loves oxygen, then why is it going to let go of it ever? Why doesn't it just circulate around our bodies carrying oxygen? And that's because when the hemoglobin reaches an environment where there is acid, which is what happens when you dissolve carbon dioxide in water, you get carbonic acid. That's why cola will dissolve almost anything. So our bodies and our tissues are forming carbon dioxide as a waste product of cellular respiration. So that's sitting down there in the tissues, making all those fluids acidic. So the hemoglobin arrives in this acidic environment, and suddenly those hemoglobin molecules don't like oxygen as much, and they release it. And they suddenly decide that they really like carbon dioxide. And so carbon dioxide can come in and be carried away on that bus right back to the lungs, where the opposite is true. Now it's not acidic, and now it wants oxygen. And so it can carry oxygen and carbon dioxide and exchange it exactly the way we need it in order for us to live. And now back to the babies. Because babies' hemoglobin is not like ours. Babies have a special kind of hemoglobin called fetal hemoglobin that has an even stronger affinity for oxygen than ours, because they're not getting their oxygen from the air like we do. They're getting it from oxygen that is dissolved in the blood of the mother at the placenta. And so that hemoglobin needs to have an even stronger ability to hold on to that oxygen, and it does. And I was doing a little bit of research because I didn't want to say anything wrong, and I also hope to impress you. But when babies are getting that oxygen from the mother's placenta, that blood returns to the baby's heart, and it goes through the belly button and then to the liver, and then it makes a direct connection with that inferior vena cava. You remember that picture? That's the main vessel that returns from the lower part of the body and goes right up into the right atrium. I told you to remember that chamber. So where that blood enters, it joins at the back of the vessel, and it's carrying oxygenated blood, but it's joining with a stream of blood that is deoxygenated. So this would present a problem for the baby, but when it gets to the atrium, there's a ridge called the interatrial ridge, and it causes the blood to divide, so that the oxygenated blood goes through the opening that God placed there between the two atria, so that that blood goes directly out the aorta and up to the baby's brain and the body where it needs oxygen. And that deoxygenated blood takes the regular pathway back out to the placenta where it can get oxygen, which is amazing. Let's see, what else? So we know that hemoglobin can carry 1 million molecules of oxygen per hemoglobin molecule, and we're loaded with it. Although if you're not, you probably feel it. That's why we check your blood and your hemoglobin. If your hemoglobin is low, even though you're oxygenating it well, you're still not carrying enough oxygen out to your tissues. So we will either give you iron, or we might need to give you more blood. Let's see here, I have a few notes here. Oh, about alveoli. When babies first are born, those little air sacs, well, have you ever tried to pick up a glass on a summer day on a counter and it sticks? Or it slides across? That's because of something called hydrogen bonding. And that's a property that water has, and it can be a really strong force. Unfortunately, babies aren't breathing oxygen in the womb, they're breathing water as they're practicing to breathe air, so their lungs are very wet. And if they're born too early, and sometimes if they're born by C-section, where they don't get kind of wrung out by birth, they can have lungs that are really sticky, because it's just like trying to separate, if you've ever had a slide on 2 wet slides or 2 wet pieces of glass, that tissue doesn't want to pop open like it needs to when they take their first breath. But God has made our lungs so that in the last maybe 6 weeks or so, it produces a substance called surfactant. And it's like soap. So it makes it so that the hydrogen molecules can't bond together as tightly. So those alveoli pop open when the baby takes their first breath. And when they take that first breath also, it changes the blood flow path through the heart, because suddenly the pressures are different. And where blood before was shunted over to the other side, now suddenly it wants to go through the lungs, which is where it needs to go, and it causes those valves that were open so that fetal oxygenation could happen in the absence of air to breathe. They close. And when you look at all of us, and you think one cell became trillions, it's kind of a miracle that any of us turn out functioning. And we know that it doesn't always work. But the fact that it so rarely doesn't work is, I think, evidence of God's grace. And also, God loves variety. You look at us, we're all so similar that I can give each of you the same drug and I know how you'll respond. But we look different, we think differently, we experience life differently. I think that shows God's great interest and love of variety. I wish we could love ourselves a little better because He likes it when we don't look exactly alike. We just want to. One other thing about babies, because I think this is kind of amazing too, breast milk. God made it so perfectly for babies to drink that their bodies can absorb it 100% and leave no waste. We can't eat food that way. It's so efficient that they can get everything they need from that one single source, and it provides the fuel for their developing brains and for all of their cells to grow. It's kind of another miracle. I'll drop.
Blown away. I'm just blown away by God's grace, first of all, but by His precision and complexity and intricacy, the way He has put us together. Would you thank Joel and Robin? So appreciate their willingness to come share. I appreciate the education they've gone through. I appreciate their expertise and their knowledge. I appreciate that they're on the same journey that you and I are on, and we're all trying to be followers of Jesus, and we want our lives to reflect Him. And so, Robin, Joel, thank you. If you would, like, after first service, maybe go back to the door. People might want to get to know you better, and I hope you'll take time to introduce yourselves to both of them. Crazy stuff. I'm just blown away. I wish I could even begin to understand it. That's the hard part. From what I understand, it's just, we have been woven together. You were knitted from the very beginning in a special way that is mind-boggling. I don't know how many times I was listening to Robin and Joel, and we were searching for words like awesome. I mean, we couldn't even find the word sometimes to describe that. Crazy, you know? And I'm just blown away the way that God has woven us together. And everything feeds off each other and works with precision. And our joints move 25 million times, they say, over the course of a lifetime. Some begin to wear out. But what else could... Man can't even come close to duplicating what God has put together. Every human being is a miracle that far exceeds anything we know. Anything we imagine. We're a miracle. And God has put you together.
Amen.
Fearfully and wonderfully made. Knit together. Knit together. I hope today reminded you of the power of God, the precision of God, the complexity of God. Why did it that way? I don't know. But man, didn't He do a good job? Boy, and yet we can go and mistreat our bodies. We can mistreat other people who've been made in the image of God. All we have to do, look in the mirror and see the precision God has. Next week we'll talk about nature, the animals. Joe talks about the different animals. And we'll follow up with the universe. Incredibly complex. I hope today that you begin to just see God a little differently. Maybe you see yourself a little differently. But I hope you are awestruck by a God who can do this. Yada. He knows you. I don't know what you're going through, but I believe with all my heart that God does. He can knit you together the way He has. He knows what you're going through. Job didn't question it for a while, then he kind of questioned it. I said, Job, were you there when I laid the foundations? No, see, he didn't say, this is why you're going through it, Job. He just said, I know. I hope that helps you. Strengthens your belief. Rock solid. Is he always going to solve everything for me? No. I believe he can. I believe sometimes he does. But I'm going to trust him in the good and the bad. Why? Who am I? It's a question. I wasn't there when he hung the stars, when he formed me. So I'm just going to trust him. A couple molecules, cells get together, chromosomes get together, and God breathes a miracle into you and to me. And so we stand in awe of a God who can do that. Who can do that? Reminds me of Romans 12:1. He says, present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable. I want to do that with this crazy body that God's given me. I want it to be acceptable. I want it to be holy. I want it to be surrendered to a God who loves you, who loves me. If you've never surrendered all of your cells and molecules, your heart, mind, and soul to the Lord, maybe you want to do that. Why would you not want to? Why would I want to live life on my terms, thinking I can solve it? He knows. He knows. We'll pray and we'll sing our closing song. Trust that you're awestruck. Dear God, I thank you today just for this glimpse inside this incredible human body. Thank you for Robin and for Joel and for their willingness to share with us. Thank you that they have a desire to help people with our medical conditions, but they also care deeply about eternity as well. Thank you for the path that we're all on as we try to strive to be more like Jesus. Father, may our bodies be presented to you as flawed as we are, our decisions have flawed us, but we're made new in you. You created us new when we surrender to you. Father, maybe there's someone here today that wants to surrender. I trust that they would fully surrender every part of them. May they do that so that you can receive glory and honor that is due only you. There's none like you. You are almighty. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand as we close.
I see the Holy One, high and exalted. I hide my eyes and I tremble before Him. I tremble before Him. I see the Holy One, high and exalted. I hide my eyes and I tremble before Him. I tremble. You are almighty, standing in the presence of Your majesty. You're holy. You alone deserve the crown of royalty. You're the King of kings, almighty, standing in the presence of Your majesty. You're holy. You alone deserve the crown of royalty. You're the King of kings, almighty, Have a blessed week.
Thank you.